Arizona Territory, 1868. The desert had a way of swallowing sounds, but not the wailing. Kate Smith's cries echoed across the parched landscape as she knelt beside the freshly dug grave. Her golden hair, usually pinned neatly beneath a bonnet, now whipped wildly in the wind, mirroring the chaos in her heart. At 23, she wore black, the color of endings, not beginnings. "Thomas," she whispered, her throat raw from hours of sobbing. Her fingers traced the crude wooden cross bearing his name. "How am I supposed to do this without you?" The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, indifferent to her grief. In the distance, heat waves shimmered above the horizon, distorting the vast emptiness that now seemed to stretch within her, as well as around her. Thomas Smith had been a good husband. Not perfect, perhaps, but good in ways that mattered. He'd built this ranch with nothing but determination and calloused hands. He'd loved her with a steadiness that anchored her in this harsh territory, and now he was gone, claimed by the fangs of a rattlesnake while mending the north fence. Just like that. One moment alive, the next, poisoned and delirious with fever. Within hours, she became the widow Smith. Behind her stood the only other mourner, Waya, tall and stoic, his long black hair pulled back with a leather cord. The Apache had not cried, but grief carved deep lines around his mouth. Thomas hadn't just been his employer. He'd been his friend, perhaps his only true friend among the white settlers. Kate remembered the day Thomas had brought Waya home. "He's the best tracker in the territory," Thomas had explained, his eyes alight with admiration. "And he saved my life once years ago when I was lost in the mountains. Taught me to fish when I was starving." Thomas had laughed then. "I was using all the wrong bait. Stubborn fool that I was." At first, Kate had been wary. The newspapers from back east were filled with stories of Apache raids, of settlers scalped and homesteads burned. But Waya had defied every expectation. Quiet and dignified, he worked harder than any man she'd ever known. And over time, something remarkable had happened. Thomas and Waya had become friends, real friends who shared meals at their table, who swapped stories by the fire, who respected each other in a way that transcended the usual boundaries between white men and Indians. Now Thomas was gone, and Kate was left with a ranch too big for one woman to manage, and an Apache whose dark eyes seemed to see right through her carefully maintained composure. "We should go back," Waya finally said, his deep voice cutting through her sobs. "The sun grows angry, it will burn you." Kate nodded, rising shakily to her feet. Thomas's grave overlooked the entire ranch, the cabin with its smoke-darkened chimney, the corral where 3 horses grazed, the small garden patch she tended, and the sprawling acres of land that now belonged solely to her, land she had no idea how to manage alone. As they walked back in silence, Kate noticed 3 riders approaching from the east. She recognized them immediately. Clayton Williams, who owned the neighboring ranch, Sheriff Mills from the town of Copper Creek, and Pastor Thornton, whose church she and Thomas had attended on the rare occasions they made the half-day journey into town. "They're coming to offer condolences," Kate said, more to herself than to Waya. Waya's expression hardened. "They're coming to see what the widow will do." He was right, of course. By the time they reached the cabin, the men had dismounted. Clayton Williams, red-faced and portly despite the harsh living conditions, stepped forward first, hat in hand. "Mrs. Smith, our deepest sympathies. Thomas was a fine man." "Thank you, Mr. Williams." Sheriff Mills nodded solemnly, his weather-beaten face etched with what appeared to be genuine sorrow. "A terrible tragedy. If there's anything we can do—" Pastor Thornton cleared his throat. "Perhaps, Mrs. Smith, you might consider returning east to your family. A woman alone in these parts—" "I'm not alone," Kate interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have Waya." The 3 men exchanged glances. Clayton's eyes narrowed as he looked at the Apache. "Mrs. Smith," he began carefully, "now that Thomas is gone, there's no reason for him to stay. I'd be willing to purchase your land at a fair price. You could return to civilization, to your father." "My father disowned me when I married Thomas," Kate said flatly. "And this ranch isn't for sale." Sheriff Mills stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal thinning hair plastered to his scalp with sweat. "Kate, be sensible. No proper woman can run a ranch alone, much less with only an Indian for company. People will talk. Let them talk." Kate lifted her chin, feeling a surge of defiance that momentarily overwhelmed her grief. This land was Thomas's dream. It's all I have left of him. Pastor Thornton tried a different approach, his thin lips stretching into what he probably thought was a compassionate smile. What about the Apache? Surely he'll want to return to his people now. All eyes turned to Waya, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. His face betrayed nothing, but Kate caught the subtle tensing of his shoulders, the way his hand moved slightly closer to the knife at his belt. Waya knows this land better than anyone, Kate said before he could speak. He's staying. She turned to face him directly, her blue eyes meeting his dark ones. If you're willing. For a moment something flashed in Waya's eyes, something Kate couldn't quite name. Then he nodded once, a gesture of both respect and commitment. Clayton's face flushed darker, the color clashing with his ginger mutton chops. This is madness. A white woman and a savage. Mr. Williams, Kate cut him off, her grief momentarily eclipsed by anger. Waya was Thomas's friend. He's educated, skilled, and has been living and working here for 2 years. I trust him with my life. The men departed shortly after, their disapproval hanging in the air like the dust from their horses' hooves. Kate watched them go, exhaustion settling into her bones. They'll be back, Waya said quietly beside her. Kate nodded. I know. You should consider their offer. Life will be hard here. Life is hard everywhere. Kate turned to face him. In the fading light, with the vast Arizona sky stretching endlessly behind him, Waya looked like he belonged to the land itself, as permanent and natural as the mountains on the horizon. Thomas once told me that you saved his life years ago, that you taught him how to fish when he was starving in the mountains. A ghost of a smile touched Waya's lips. He was using the wrong bait. Stubborn man. Teach me, Kate said suddenly, the words bursting from her before she could reconsider. Teach me everything. How to manage the ranch, how to read the land like you do. I can't do this alone, but I won't leave. This was our home. Thomas is buried here. Waya studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable in the gathering dusk. The neighbors will not approve. The neighbors can go to... Kate caught herself. The neighbors don't feed me or keep this roof over my head. Will you help me, Waya? Please? The word please seemed to surprise him. Kate realized that in the 2 years Waya had worked for them, she'd never heard Thomas say it to him. Orders, yes. Gratitude occasionally, but never, please. I will stay, Waya finally said, the words simple but carrying the weight of a solemn oath, until you no longer need me. That night, Kate cried herself to sleep in the cabin she'd shared with Thomas. The emptiness of his side of the bed felt vast and cold. Outside, beneath a blanket of stars, Waya made his bed by the dying embers of the fire, close enough to protect her if needed, far enough to maintain the propriety that would shield her from further gossip. Neither knew then that this arrangement would last 5 long years, or that with each passing day, the distance between them would grow simultaneously more proper and more unbearable. The first year passed in a blur of grief and struggle. Kate learned that ranching required more than just desire. It demanded blood and sweat, and an endless reserve of determination. The cattle needed tending, the horses required training, the fences constantly needed mending, and the land itself seemed to fight them at every turn. Summer brought drought that cracked the earth and threatened their water supply. Fall brought early frost that killed half their garden. Winter brought biting cold that claimed 2 calves despite their best efforts to save them. But Waya was always there, silent, watchful, teaching. The sky speaks, he told her one evening, pointing to the crimson sunset that painted the western horizon in shades of fire. Red clouds mean dry tomorrow. Good for hanging laundry. Kate smiled, one of her first genuine smiles since Thomas's death. And here I thought they were just pretty. Pretty things can also be useful, Waya replied, his eyes lingering on her face a moment too long before returning to the horizon. He taught her to track game, showing her how to read the subtle indentations in sand that revealed a jackrabbit's passing. He taught her to predict weather by the behavior of animals. When the lizards disappeared from sunning rocks, rain would follow within hours. He showed her how to conserve water during the driest months, how to find underground springs by watching where certain plants grew. In turn, Kate learned to shoot with deadly accuracy, spending hours practicing with Thomas's old Winchester until she could hit a can at 50 paces without hesitation. She learned to ride faster and longer than she ever had under Thomas's tutelage, her body growing strong and her skin tanning beneath the relentless Arizona sun. She learned to mend fences and negotiate prices with the merchants who occasionally passed through, men who initially tried to swindle the poor widow until they realized she knew the value of every hide and ounce of grain. By the second year, the ranch was not just surviving, it was beginning to thrive. They had expanded the garden, adding a small orchard of drought-resistant fruit trees. They had added 8 head of cattle to their small herd, and the 2 mares had produced healthy foals. The cabin roof, which had leaked terribly during the first winter, had been repaired and reinforced. Kate's hands grew calloused, her golden hair bleached even lighter by the sun. She cut it shorter for practicality, though she still wore her few dresses on Sundays out of habit, even when they didn't make the journey to town. It was on one such Sunday, as Kate emerged from the cabin in a faded blue dress that had once been her best, that she caught Waya staring. "What is it?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Is something wrong?" Waya shook his head. "You look like the sky after rain." The compliment, unexpected and poetic, brought heat to her cheeks. "Thank you," she managed, not knowing what else to say. That evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit stew, Kate found herself studying Waya's profile in the firelight. The strong line of his jaw, the proud set of his shoulders, the way his hands, capable of such strength, could be so gentle when treating an injured animal or planting seeds. "Tell me about your people," she said suddenly. "Your family. Don't you miss them?" Waya was silent for so long that Kate thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "My mother was Chiricahua Apache. My father was a Mexican trader who stayed. They were killed during a cavalry raid when I was 14. His eyes reflected the dancing flames. I lived with my mother's sister until I was a man, then chose to walk alone." "Alone? But why?" "I was between worlds. Too Apache for the whites, too influenced by my father for some of the tribe." He met her gaze. "Thomas was the first white man who saw me as neither savage nor servant. Just a man." Kate felt a pang of shame, wondering if she had ever looked at Waya through the same prejudiced lens as her neighbors. "And now?" she asked softly. "Do you still feel between worlds?" The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Now I am here." The words were simple, yet Kate felt their weight. Here, on this small ranch carved from the wilderness. Here, with her. The realization stirred something deep within her, something she wasn't yet ready to name. By the 3rd year, something had changed between them, subtle yet undeniable. It lived in the spaces between words, in glances quickly averted, in the accidental brush of hands that sent electricity through Kate's veins. She told herself it was gratitude, or perhaps just the natural closeness that develops between 2 people surviving together. But in her most honest moments, usually in the dark of night when there was no one to witness her thoughts, Kate admitted the truth. She was falling in love with Waya. The realization should have horrified her. Instead, it felt like recognition, like finally naming a constellation she'd been staring at for years. Still, they maintained their careful distance. Waya continued to sleep outside, moving into the small storage shed during the worst weather. Kate kept to the cabin. The invisible boundary remained unbreached, until one crisp autumn day when everything nearly fell apart. They had ridden to the far end of the property to check on a break in the fence line. Kate dismounted first, kneeling to examine the damage. "Coyotes," Waya said, crouching beside her. "Too small for wolves." Kate nodded, reaching for the tools they'd brought. As she stood, her foot caught on a root, sending her stumbling backward. Waya's arms caught her before she fell, strong and sure around her waist. For one breathless moment they were pressed together, her back against his chest, his breath warm against her hair. Neither moved. Kate could feel his heartbeat, rapid and strong, matching her own. His hands at her waist burned through the fabric of her shirt. "Kate," he whispered, and the sound of her name on his lips broke something inside her. She turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his. For one eternal moment, she thought he might kiss her. His dark eyes dropped to her lips, his head began to lower. The distant sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment. They sprang apart just as Clayton Williams and 2 of his ranch hands appeared over the rise. "Well, well," Clayton called, his voice dripping with insinuation. "Quite cozy out here, aren't you, Mrs. Smith?" Kate straightened her shirt with trembling hands. "Mr. Williams, we're repairing the fence line." Clayton dismounted, his eyes cold as they swept from Kate to Waya and back. "Is that what they're calling it these days? You know, folks in town have been talking. A white widow living alone with a savage. It ain't proper." "What I do on my property is none of your concern," Kate replied, her voice steadier than her nerves. Clayton stepped closer, towering over her, his breath sour with tobacco. "Maybe it should be. Thomas was my friend. I doubt he'd approve of his widow debasing herself with—" Waya moved so quickly that Kate barely saw it happen. One moment Clayton was sneering down at her, the next he was stumbling backward, Waya's hand at his collar. "You dishonor her with your words," Waya said, his voice deadly quiet. "And you dishonor Thomas's memory." Clayton's ranch hands reached for their guns. Kate stepped between them. "Enough!" she shouted. "Mr. Williams, you are trespassing. Please leave." For a tense moment no one moved. The only sound was the harsh breathing of the men and the stamp of nervous horses. Then Clayton straightened his collar, his face mottled with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over," he spat. "No decent white woman chooses an Indian over her own kind. You'll regret this, Kate Smith." They rode away, leaving dust and threats hanging in the air. Kate turned to Waya, fear clutching at her throat. "They'll be back, with the sheriff maybe." Waya nodded grimly. "I should leave." "No." The word burst from her with unexpected force. "No," she repeated more softly. "Running would only make us look guilty of something." "Aren't we?" Waya asked, his eyes searching hers. Kate couldn't answer. The truth was too dangerous, too raw. That night Waya moved his sleeping roll farther from the cabin, and Kate understood. What had almost happened at the fence line could never happen again, for both their sakes. And so began the 4th year, a time of distance carefully maintained. They worked side by side during the day, their conversation limited to the practical matters of the ranch. At night, they retreated to their separate worlds, Kate to her cabin, Waya to his place under the stars. But sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, Kate would watch him, the graceful economy of his movements, the quiet strength in his hands, the rare smile that transformed his solemn face. And sometimes, when she was sure he was asleep, she would stand at her window and gaze out at his silhouette, wondering if things could have been different in another time, another place. What she didn't know was that Waya watched her too, the determination in her stride as she crossed the yard, the gentleness she showed to the animals, the way the sun turned her hair to living gold. He watched, and he wanted, and he remembered his promise to Thomas, to protect her, always, even from himself. The 5th year brought prosperity to the ranch. The cattle herd had grown to 20 head, the garden yielded more than they could eat, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Kate felt financially secure. She could have hired help now, proper ranch hands to replace Waya's solitary labor, but she never suggested it, and he never asked. They had fallen into a rhythm, a partnership that worked despite, or perhaps because of, the unspoken boundaries between them. Then came October, and with it the storm that would change everything. It began as a distant rumble on the horizon, a darkening line of clouds that transformed the usually bright blue sky into something ominous. Kate was hanging laundry, squinting at the gathering gloom. "Storm's coming," Waya said, appearing beside her with an armload of firewood. "A big one." Kate nodded, hastily gathering the half-dry clothes. "I'll secure the chickens. Can you check on the horses?" By nightfall the storm had arrived in full fury. Rain lashed the cabin in horizontal sheets, driven by winds that howled like wounded animals. Lightning split the sky every few minutes, followed by thunder that shook the very foundations of the house. Kate paced anxiously, peering out the window into the pitch darkness. The shed where Waya sometimes slept was barely visible through the deluge, its roof already showing signs of strain under the onslaught. A particularly violent gust tore part of the shed roof away. Kate gasped, watching as corrugated metal twisted and sailed into the darkness. Without thinking, she grabbed a lantern, threw a shawl over her shoulders, and yanked open the cabin door. "Waya!" she shouted into the storm. "Waya, come inside!" For several heart-stopping moments, there was no response. Rain drove into her face, nearly extinguishing the lantern. The wind whipped her nightdress around her legs. Then a figure materialized from the darkness. Waya drenched and shivering, his long hair plastered to his face. He stopped at the threshold, water pooling at his feet. Their eyes met across the doorway. That invisible boundary neither had crossed after dark in 5 long years. "Let me in," he said simply, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. The words held more weight than just a request for shelter. They both knew it. This was the moment when everything would change. Kate stepped back, opening the door wider. "Of course." Waya entered, bringing with him the smell of rain and wild sage. He stood awkwardly just inside the door, water streaming from his clothes onto the wooden floor. "You're soaked through," Kate said, busying herself with gathering towels to hide her sudden nervousness. "You'll catch your death. Here." She handed him a towel and turned to stoke the fire, aware of him drying his hair behind her. When she turned back, he had removed his sodden shirt. Kate's breath caught in her throat at the sight of his bare chest, broad, muscled, marked with scars both old and new. Stories written on skin. I'll find you something dry to wear," she stammered, hurrying to the trunk where she still kept some of Thomas's clothes. She returned with a faded flannel shirt that had been her husband's. Waya took it with a nod of thanks, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. That brief contact sent a jolt through Kate that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. "I'll make us something hot to eat," she said, retreating to the small kitchen area. As she heated leftover stew on the cook stove, Kate was acutely aware of Waya moving about the cabin. This space that had been exclusively hers for so long, now suddenly filled with his presence. He examined the books on the shelf, the quilt she'd been working on, the pressed wildflower she'd framed on the wall. "You've made it beautiful," he said quietly. Kate looked up from the stew. "What?" "The cabin. It was just wooden nails when Thomas built it. Now it feels like home," Kate offered when he trailed off. Waya nodded, his expression unreadable in the firelight. They ate in companionable silence, the storm raging outside making the warmth within feel all the more precious. Kate noticed that Waya ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were his last meal. She wondered if he was thinking what she was thinking, that after tonight nothing would be the same. When they finished, Kate collected the bowls and began washing them in the basin. "I've never asked," she said over her shoulder, her voice unnaturally loud in the quiet cabin, "why you stayed all these years. You could have gone anywhere." The silence stretched so long that Kate thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "You know why?" Kate's hands stilled in the soapy water. Slowly she turned to face him. Waya stood by the fire, his features cast in gold and shadow, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Say it," she whispered. "After 5 years, Waya, say it." He took a step toward her, then another, until he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I stayed because I made a promise to Thomas. To protect you." Kate felt disappointment crush the breath from her lungs. "Is that the only reason?" Waya lifted a hand, slowly, cautiously, and touched her cheek. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was unbearably gentle. "I stayed because the thought of leaving you was like the thought of cutting out my own heart." Kate closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "How long have you felt this way?" "Since the first time I saw you. You were hanging laundry, singing to yourself. The wind caught your hair." Kate opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "Why didn't you ever say anything? You were Thomas's wife and then his widow, and I—" He gestured to himself, to the dark skin that had defined so much of his life in white society. "And you thought I cared about that?" Kate asked, her voice breaking. "I thought you should care." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "The world is cruel to those who defy it. I don't care about the world." Kate placed her hand over his, holding it against her face. "I care about you. I have for years." The confession hung between them, impossible to take back. Kate watched emotions war across Waya's face. Longing, fear, hope, resolve. "Kate," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. And then he was kissing her, or she was kissing him. It didn't matter which. 5 years of restraint collapsed in an instant, his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him, her hands tangled in his hair, still damp from the rain. The kiss deepened, desperate and tender all at once. When they finally broke apart, Breathless, Kate rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the thunder of his heart. "Stay," she whispered. "Not outside. Not anymore." Waya tilted her face up to his. "If I stay, Kate, I stay forever. There is no halfway for me." "Forever," Kate repeated, the word both terrifying and perfect. "Yes." That night, as the storm raged outside, they talked for hours, sharing secrets, fears, hopes, dreams. They spoke of Thomas with respect and love, acknowledging the guilt they both still carried, while recognizing that life continued, that love could grow anew from loss. Waya told her of his childhood among the Chiricahua, of his mother who had been a skilled weaver, of his father who had taught him Spanish and English alongside his native tongue. He spoke of the cavalry raid that had left him orphaned, of the years spent moving between worlds, too Indian for the whites, too influenced by outside ways for many of his own people. Kate told him of her childhood in Boston, of her father's stern disapproval of anything that didn't fit his narrow view of propriety, of her mother's quiet rebellion in teaching Kate to think for herself. She told him of meeting Thomas at a friend's party, of his wild tales of the West that had captured her imagination, of her father's fury when she announced their engagement. "He said I would regret throwing my life away on a frontier nobody," Kate said, her voice soft with memory. "But I never did, not for a single day." "Thomas was a good man," Waya agreed. "He saw people for who they were, not what they were expected to be." "Like you," Kate said, touching his face. "He saw you." "And now you see me," Waya replied, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. And when words gave way to touch, they discovered each other slowly, reverently, learning the language of skin and breath and whispered names. Later, as Kate lay in Waya's arms, watching the firelight play across his sleeping face, she knew there would be consequences. Clayton Williams and his ilk would not accept their union. The town would shun them. Perhaps even the law would threaten them. But for the first time since Thomas's death, perhaps for the first time in her life, Kate felt truly, completely whole. Whatever came, they would face it together. What she couldn't know was how soon that resolve would be tested. The storm passed, but the change it brought remained. Waya moved into the cabin permanently, though they maintained separate sleeping arrangements whenever visitors might arrive, a precaution against the gossip they knew was already circulating. For 3 blissful months they lived in a fragile bubble of happiness. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint care. They shared meals, stories, dreams, and increasingly, a bed. Kate taught Waya to read better, using Thomas's old books. He taught her Apache words, laughing gently at her mispronunciations. In the evenings they would sit on the porch, watching the sun paint the desert in impossible colors. Sometimes they would talk about the future, perhaps moving farther west to California or Oregon, where their relationship might face less scrutiny. Other times, they would simply exist together in companionable silence, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. These were the happiest months of Kate's life. Then, one crisp January morning, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. Kate was collecting eggs when she spotted him, an elegant figure on a fine horse, approaching with the deliberate pace of someone with purpose rather than a traveler passing through. "Waya," she called, a note of alarm in her voice. He materialized beside her almost instantly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt as he followed her gaze. "Do you know him?" Waya asked, squinting against the winter sun. Kate felt the blood drain from her face as the rider drew closer. "Yes," she whispered. "It's my father." Reginald Hargrove had not aged well in the 7 years since Kate had last seen him. His once robust frame had thinned, his red hair faded to grey, but the rigid set of his shoulders and the imperious tilt of his chin remained unchanged. He was still every inch the Boston businessman who had disowned his only daughter for marrying beneath her station. "Catherine," he said stiffly as he dismounted. His cold eyes swept over her simple dress, her sun-browned skin, before shifting to Waya with undisguised disdain. "Father," Kate replied, equally cold. "What brings you to Arizona? A father doesn't need a reason to visit his daughter. A father who disowns his daughter does." Reginald's jaw tightened. "May we speak privately?" Kate felt Waya tense beside her. She placed a hand on his arm, a subtle gesture of reassurance. Anything you have to say can be said in front of Waya. He's my partner. A sneer twisted Reginald's features. Partner? Is that what they call it out here? Kate fought to keep her voice steady. Why are you here, father? Reginald removed his gloves, a deliberate delay tactic Kate recognized from childhood. Your Aunt Margaret has died. As her only living relative beyond myself, you've inherited a considerable sum. Aunt Margaret? Kate blinked in surprise. Her mother's sister had always been kind to her, sending letters and small gifts even after Reginald's decree of disownment. I'm sorry to hear it. Yes, well, Reginald glanced around the ranch with poorly disguised contempt. The inheritance could offer you a fresh start, away from all this. Kate crossed her arms. This is my home. A hovel in the wilderness is hardly a home for a Hargrove woman. I'm not a Hargrove anymore. I'm a Smith. Reginald's expression darkened. Yes, your unfortunate marriage. I heard about Thomas's passing. My condolences, belated as they may be. His tone suggested the condolences were merely a formality. Kate felt Waya shift beside her, a subtle movement that positioned him slightly in front of her, protective, instinctive. Reginald noticed. His eyes narrowed. I see you've found companionship in your widowhood. Waya was Thomas's friend, Kate said evenly. He's been essential to keeping the ranch running. I'm sure he has. Reginald's smile was cold. Catherine, I've come to bring you home. The inheritance is substantial enough that you need never work again. You can resume your place in proper society. My place is here. With a savage, Reginald spat the word. Have you no shame? Kate felt her temper flare. The only shame I feel is having a father who judges a man's worth by the color of his skin rather than the content of his character. Reginald's face flushed with anger. You always were willful, like your mother. It led her to an early grave, and it will do the same to you if you remain in this godless place. You have no right. I have every right, Reginald thundered. I am your father. You forfeited that claim when you turned your back on me for marrying Thomas. A tense silence fell. Waya, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke, his deep voice calm. Mr. Hargrove, you have had a long journey. Perhaps you would like to rest before continuing this discussion. Reginald looked at Waya as if he were dirt beneath his boots. I don't recall addressing you, Indian. Father, Kate warned, stepping forward. You are a guest on our property. You will treat Waya with respect or you will leave. Something ugly flashed in Reginald's eyes. Our property? Has he convinced you to sign over Thomas's land? Is that his game? There is no game, Kate said through gritted teeth. Waya and I run this ranch together. We share everything. Everything. Reginald's gaze flicked between them, understanding dawning with visceral disgust. Dear God, Catherine, tell me you haven't... That's enough. Waya's voice had dropped to a dangerous register. You dishonor your daughter with such accusations. Reginald's hand moved to the inner pocket of his coat, a motion that set off alarm bells in Kate's mind. Before she could react, Waya had moved, lightning fast, placing himself fully between her and her father. Waya, don't... Kate began, but fell silent when Reginald withdrew, not a weapon, but a folded document. I came prepared for your situation, Reginald said, his voice icily controlled. This is a court order granting me temporary guardianship over you, Catherine. Kate stared at him, disbelief warring with fury. I'm 28 years old. You can't possibly... The courts are quite sympathetic to cases of vulnerable women in frontier territories, especially when evidence suggests they may be under undue influence or experiencing mental distress following the loss of a spouse. This is absurd. I'm perfectly sound of mind. A proper woman of sound mind does not cohabitate with a savage, Reginald countered. The sheriff in town seemed to agree, quite eagerly in fact. Kate felt sick. Clayton Williams. He must have written to her father, perhaps tracked him down through Thomas's old correspondence. You can't force me to leave, she said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. Reginald smiled thinly. I've already made arrangements. We leave for Boston at the end of the week. The ranch will be sold with proceeds placed in trust until you are deemed recovered. And if I refuse, then your Apache friend will be arrested for taking advantage of a white woman in distress. The penalties for such crimes are quite severe, I understand. Kate felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Waya, whose expression had gone completely blank, a mask she recognized from their early days together, when he had hidden his true feelings beneath a veneer of stoicism. "You wouldn't," she whispered to her father. "To save my daughter from ruin, I most certainly would." That night, after Reginald had retired to the small guest room that had once been Thomas's office, Kate and Waya spoke in hushed voices by the fire. "We could run," Kate suggested desperately. "Tonight, take the horses and head west." Waya shook his head. "Your father would send men after us. They would call it kidnapping. Then what do we do? I won't go to Boston. I won't leave you." Waya took her hands in his. "Kate, listen to me. Your father is a powerful man with the law on his side. If you defy him openly, he will destroy everything we've built, and he will not stop until he sees me hanged." Tears spilled down Kate's cheeks. "I can't lose you. Not after everything." Waya brushed the tears away with gentle fingers. "You won't lose me, but we must be smarter than your father. We must let him think he's won." "What do you mean?" "Go with him to Boston. Secure your inheritance legally. Then, when you're free from his guardianship, come back to me." Kate stared at him in horror. "That could take months, years even." "I will wait," Waya said simply, "as I've waited before. And the ranch? Father plans to sell it. I have savings, not much, but perhaps enough to buy a small portion if it's sold in parcels. Enough to hold until you return." Kate clutched his hands tighter. "You're asking me to trust that everything will work out, when the whole world seems determined to keep us apart." Waya cupped her face between his palms. "I'm asking you to believe in what we've built, in what we feel for each other." "I do," Kate whispered, "with all my heart. Then we will find our way back to each other. I promise." They spent that night holding each other, memorizing the feel of skin against skin, the rhythm of shared breaths, the perfect weight of love fulfilled yet threatened. In the morning, Kate told her father she would return to Boston with him, under certain conditions. She would have access to her inheritance immediately, freedom to manage her own affairs once in Boston, and a guarantee that no harm would come to Waya. Reginald, believing he had won, agreed readily enough. "Of course, Catherine. Once you're away from this influence, I'm sure you'll come to your senses." Within 3 days, arrangements were made. The ranch would be put up for auction. Kate would travel east with her father. Waya would disappear. On their last night together, as they lay entwined in what had become their bed, Kate pressed something into Waya's hand. Her mother's ring, a simple gold band that had somehow survived all the upheavals of her life. "Keep this," she whispered. "Return it to me when we're together again." Waya slipped it onto a leather cord and hung it around his neck, next to the small medicine pouch he always wore. "It will never leave me." At dawn, they said their goodbyes in the privacy of the cabin, fierce, desperate, filled with promises neither knew if they could keep. 6 months, Kate whispered against his lips. "No longer. I'll find a way." Waya traced the contours of her face as if committing them to memory. "I will be waiting, always." Later, as Reginald loaded Kate's trunk onto the waiting wagon, Waya stood at a respectful distance, his face impassive. To anyone watching, he appeared merely a loyal employee bidding farewell to his employer. Only Kate could see the storm in his eyes. "Goodbye, Waya," she said formally, extending her hand as if to a casual acquaintance. "Thank you for your years of service." He took her hand, his thumb brushing once across her knuckles, a secret caress. "Safe journey, Mrs. Smith." As the wagon pulled away, Kate did not look back. She couldn't bear to see him standing alone before the cabin where they had finally found each other, only to be torn apart. Reginald, seated beside her, smiled with satisfaction. "You're doing the right thing, Catherine. In time, you'll see that." Kate said nothing. She was already calculating how long to secure her inheritance, how quickly she could claim independence, how soon she could return to Arizona, to Waya. 6 months, she promised herself. 6 months to play the dutiful daughter, to secure her future, to plan her escape back to the only place, the only person that felt like home. What Kate couldn't know, as the wagon crested the hill and the ranch disappeared from view, was that fate had other plans entirely. Boston welcomed Reginald Hargrove's prodigal daughter with a curious mix of scandal and fascination. The story, carefully curated by her father, presented Kate as a grieving widow rescued from frontier hardship, returning to reclaim her rightful place in society. Kate played her part impeccably. She wore the corseted dresses that now felt like cages after years of practical clothing. She attended the endless rounds of teas, dinners, and musical evenings. She smiled politely at the parade of suitable gentlemen her father introduced, widowers and bachelors of appropriate standing, all eager to court the newly wealthy Miss Hargrove, for her father had insisted she resume her maiden name. Through it all, she kept her true intentions hidden. With subtle questions to her father's lawyer, careful reading of legal documents, and strategic conversations with her aunt's former financial advisors, Kate pieced together the details of her inheritance and the rights it afforded her. The news from Arizona, however, was grim. Letters sent to Sheriff Mills inquiring about the ranch auction went unanswered. A telegram to Pastor Thornton returned only vague assurances that matters had been settled appropriately. Of Waya, there was no word at all. 4 months into her Boston exile, Kate finally received a reply from Mrs. Henderson, the postmistress in Copper Creek, who had always been kind to her. The letter was brief but devastating. "My dear Mrs. Smith, I regret to inform you that your property was indeed auctioned as planned. Mr. Clayton Williams acquired the main house and northern acreage. The remainder was purchased by the railroad for the planned extension into the territory. As for your inquiry about the Apache man, I hesitate to write this, but feel you deserve the truth. Shortly after your departure, there was an incident. Mr. Williams claimed your former employee attempted to steal horses from the property. A posse was formed. Shots were fired. He fled into the mountains. Some say he was wounded. None have seen him since. With deepest sympathies, Margaret Henderson." Kate read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking more violently with each reading. Wounded. Missing. Perhaps dead, all because of her father's manipulation and Clayton Williams's hatred. That night, alone in her luxurious bedroom, Kate made her decision. She would wait no longer. The next morning, she visited her bank and withdrew a substantial portion of her inheritance in cash and banker's drafts. She purchased a ticket west under an assumed name. She packed only what she could carry in a single trunk, practical clothes, the remainder of her funds, and a small revolver she'd acquired through one of her father's own business associates. 3 days later, while Reginald attended an extended business meeting in New York, Kate Smith, not Catherine Hargrove, boarded a train bound for Arizona Territory. The journey west was grueling. 6 days of rattling train cars, dusty stagecoaches, and sleepless nights in rough frontier hotels. Kate barely noticed the discomfort. Her mind was consumed with one thought: finding Waya. The landscape changed dramatically as she traveled, from the lush greenery of the East Coast to the rolling plains of the Midwest, and finally to the stark beauty of the desert territories. With each mile, Kate felt the constraints of Boston falling away. Her breath came easier, her spine straightened. By the time she reached Copper Creek, she had shed Catherine Hargrove completely, becoming once more the Kate Smith who had faced down drought and predators and prejudice beside the man she loved. When she finally arrived in Copper Creek, the town had changed little in the 6 months of her absence. The same dusty main street, the same weathered buildings, the same curious stares following her as she made her way to Mrs. Henderson's post office. The postmistress gasped when Kate walked through the door. "Mrs. Smith, we thought your father said you'd settled in Boston permanently." "My father says many things, Mrs. Henderson," Kate replied grimly. "None of them true." Over a cup of strong tea in the postmistress's back room, Kate learned the full story. Clayton Williams had taken possession of the ranch less than a week after her departure. The very next day, he'd accused Waya of trespassing and theft. "They hunted him like an animal," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice dropping to a whisper though they were alone. "Clayton, Sheriff Mills, and 6 men from town. They cornered him near Eagle Rock. There was gunfire. Clayton claimed the Indian shot first, but, Kate prompted, her heart in her throat. Mrs. Henderson's eyes were sad. "Thomas always said your Waya was too smart to start a fight he couldn't win, and too honorable to steal. Did they find—" Kate couldn't finish the question. No body was recovered. There was blood on the rocks. Clayton boasted that he'd wounded him. Some think he died in the wilderness. Others say he escaped into Apache territory to the south. Hope flickered in Kate's chest. If anyone could survive being wounded in the desert, it was Waya. He knew every water source, every edible plant, every hidden cave in the mountains surrounding their ranch. "I need to find him," she said, determination hardening her voice. Mrs. Henderson looked alarmed. "My dear, that's madness. The Apache lands are no place for a white woman alone, and if Clayton discovers you've returned—" "Clayton Williams doesn't frighten me," Kate said, though in truth the man terrified her, not for her own safety, but for what he had already done to Waya. "And I won't be going as a white society woman." The next day, Kate rode out of town at dawn, dressed in men's clothing, canvas trousers, a loose shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. Her hair was pinned up and hidden, her skin darkened with dust and coffee grounds. From a distance, she might pass for a young rancher or prospector. Her destination was Eagle Rock, the last place Waya had been seen. From there, she would track him as he had once taught her to track game. South, into the mountains that bordered Apache territory. The journey was perilous. Kate kept to rough trails and washes to avoid detection. She slept under the stars, her hand never far from her revolver. Each day she searched for signs, broken twigs, disturbed stones, any indication that Waya had passed this way. For 3 days she found nothing. The desert kept its secrets well. On the 4th day, as the sun began to set, she found it. A small cave entrance nearly invisible behind a stand of juniper with the faintest trace of old wood smoke lingering in the air. Heart pounding, Kate approached cautiously, her hand on the revolver at her hip. "Waya?" she called softly. "It's me, it's Kate." Silence answered her. She moved closer, ducking into the shadow of the cave entrance. The interior was cool and dark after the relentless sun. Her eyes strained to adjust. "Waya, are you—" The attack came from behind, swift, silent, efficient. A strong arm locked around her throat, another pinned her gun hand. Kate struggled, but her assailant was too powerful. Just as spots began to dance before her eyes, a familiar scent registered. Sage and leather and something uniquely Waya. The pressure eased instantly. Kate was spun around, coming face to face with the man she'd crossed a continent to find. "Kate!" Waya's voice was rough with disbelief. His hair was longer, his face leaner, a new scar cutting across his left cheekbone. But his eyes, those dark, fathomless eyes, were exactly as she remembered. "Waya," she breathed, reaching for him with trembling hands. He caught her wrists, holding her at arm's length. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "I came back for you. My father, he lied about everything. Clayton Williams tried to kill you. Keep your voice down," Waya warned, glancing past her toward the cave entrance. "Williams and his men still hunt these mountains occasionally." He led her deeper into the cave, where a small camp had been established. Bedroll, provisions, a carefully contained fire pit. In the dim light, Kate could see that he moved with a slight limp, favoring his right leg. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for him again. This time, Waya didn't stop her. Kate's hands found his face, tracing the new scar, the sharper angles of his cheekbones, the tension in his jaw. "The bullet only grazed my leg," he said quietly. "I was lucky." "Lucky?" Kate's voice broke. "They hunted you like an animal. Because of me. Because I left. Because of your father," Waya corrected firmly. "And Clayton Williams. Not because of you." Kate's fingers found the leather cord around his neck, followed it to the small bundle concealed beneath his shirt. There, nestled beside his medicine pouch, was her mother's ring, still safe, still waiting. "You kept it," she whispered. "I told you I would." His voice softened. "I keep my promises, Kate." The dam broke then, all the fear and longing of the past months pouring out in a torrent of tears. Kate collapsed against Waya's chest, sobbing out the story of Boston, her father's manipulation, her desperate journey west. Waya held her, his strong arms encircling her as if he'd never let go again. When her tears finally subsided, he tilted her face up to his. "I shouldn't have come back," he said, though his eyes said the opposite. "It's too dangerous." "I couldn't stay away," Kate replied simply. "Boston isn't my home. You are." Something fierce and tender blazed in Waya's eyes. He lowered his head, claiming her lips in a kiss that spoke of months of longing, fear, and hope. Kate melted into him, her hands clutching at his shoulders, his back, reassuring herself that he was real, that they were together again. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Waya rested his forehead against hers. "What now?" he asked. "Williams has the ranch. Your father will search for you when he discovers you've gone." "We leave," Kate said decisively. "Together, this time. I have money, my inheritance, enough to start over somewhere new. California, Oregon, even Canada if necessary, somewhere we can be together without fear." Waya studied her face in the firelight. "You would leave everything behind for me?" "I already did," Kate said softly. "The moment I boarded that train to Boston, I knew I would never truly belong there again. My place is with you, wherever that may be." Waya's smile, rare and beautiful, lit his face. "Then we will make a new home, together." That night, wrapped in each other's arms beneath a canopy of stars outside the cave, they dreamed of possibilities. A small farm by the Pacific Ocean, perhaps, or a ranch in the Northern Territories where the law was still being written and a mixed couple might find acceptance. Dawn found them packing Waya's few possessions and Kate's remaining supplies onto their horses. They would travel south first, into Apache territory where Clayton Williams and his men wouldn't follow, then west toward California. It would be a difficult journey, but they would face it together. As they prepared to leave, Waya took the leather cord from around his neck. With solemn ceremony, he removed Kate's mother's ring and held it out to her. "I return this to you," he said, "as I promised I would." Kate smiled, shaking her head. "No, I want you to give it to me properly." Understanding dawned in Waya's eyes. He lowered himself to one knee, still favoring his wounded leg, the ring held between his fingers. "Kate Smith," he said, his deep voice carrying across the quiet mountain morning, "will you be my wife, in whatever way we can make it so? Will you build a new life with me wherever the path leads us?" "Yes," Kate answered without hesitation. "In all ways, on all paths, for all days." Waya slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her. A promise sealed, a future claimed. They were a mile from the cave, following a narrow deer trail south, when they heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast from the north. "Williams," Waya said grimly, pulling his horse to a halt beside Kate's. Kate's hand moved to the revolver at her hip. "How did they find us?" "It doesn't matter. We need to split up. I'll lead them away. You continue south." "No," Kate grabbed his arm. "We stay together. I won't lose you again." The hoofbeats grew louder. Waya's expression was anguished. "Kate, please. If they catch us together, then we face them together." Her voice was steel. "I'm done running from men like Clayton Williams, done hiding what we are to each other." Before Waya could argue further, the riders appeared on the ridge above them. Clayton Williams, Sheriff Mills, and 4 other men Kate didn't recognize. All armed, all looking at Waya with undisguised hatred. "Well, look what we have here," Clayton called, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "The thieving Apache and—" He squinted at Kate, recognition dawning with ugly surprise. "Mrs. Smith, or should I say Miss Hargrove, your father's been searching for you." Kate straightened in her saddle, chin lifted in defiance. "My name is Kate Smith, and I'm exactly where I choose to be." Clayton's face darkened. "With your savage lover. Have you no shame, woman?" "The only shame here is yours, Clayton Williams," Kate replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Attacking an innocent man, stealing our ranch through lies and manipulation." "Innocent?" Clayton spat. "He's a horse thief and a trespasser." "He's my husband," Kate declared loud enough for all to hear. She held up her hand, her mother's ring glinting in the morning sun. "And that ranch was our home." A stunned silence fell over the posse. Sheriff Mills shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. One of the younger men actually removed his hat, as if in the presence of a legitimate union. Clayton recovered first, his face mottling with rage. "This is an abomination, Sheriff. Arrest them both." Sheriff Mills hesitated, looking from Clayton to Kate and Waya. "On what charge exactly, Clayton? Being married ain't a crime, even if it's unusual." "He attacked me, stole my horses." "Your horses?" Kate laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Those were our horses on our ranch, which you stole through fraud while I was forced to Boston against my will." "I purchased that ranch legal and proper at auction," Clayton blustered. "An auction arranged by my father through coercion and lies," Kate countered. She turned to Sheriff Mills. "Sheriff, I have documents proving my inheritance and legal right to make my own decisions. My father had no authority to sell my property. This was a calculated risk. The documents were in her saddlebag, but they might not hold up in a territorial court. Still, the confidence in her voice sowed visible doubt among the posse. "That's horseshit," Clayton snarled, reaching for his gun. "I ain't letting no Indian-loving whore take my—" The shot rang out before Clayton could finish his sentence or draw his weapon. He toppled from his horse, clutching his shoulder, his face a mask of shock and pain. All eyes turned to Kate, who held her smoking revolver with a steady hand. "The next one goes between your eyes, Clayton," she said quietly. "Unless you and your men turn around and ride away." Sheriff Mills raised his hands placatingly. "Now, Mrs. Smith, let's not make this worse than it already is." "This man tried to murder Waya," Kate replied, her gun still trained on Clayton. "He conspired with my father to steal our ranch. He just called me a whore and reached for his weapon. How exactly could this get worse, Sheriff?" An uneasy silence fell. The men of the posse looked at each other, then at their wounded leader groaning in the dirt, clearly reconsidering the wisdom of their venture. Waya, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. "We don't want bloodshed. We're leaving the territory. All we ask is safe passage." Sheriff Mills studied them thoughtfully. "Your father's offering a substantial reward for your return, Mrs. Smith." "My father no longer controls my life or my fortune," Kate replied. "And if you try to take me back, you'll have to kill both of us first." The sheriff sighed deeply, then made his decision. "Clayton, you need that shoulder tended to. Boys, help him back on his horse." He turned to Kate and Waya. "I suggest you two ride fast and don't look back. Next time I see you, I might not be feeling so understanding." Relief flooded through Kate. She lowered her weapon slowly. "Thank you, Sheriff." As the posse prepared to depart, Clayton Williams, pale with pain and rage, spat a final threat. "This ain't over! You hear me? This ain't over!" Kate met his gaze unflinchingly. "Yes, Clayton, it is." They watched until the posse disappeared over the ridge, taking with them the last ties to their old life. When they were truly alone again, Waya turned to Kate. Awe and pride mingled in his expression. "You shot Clayton Williams." A smile tugged at Kate's lips. "I aimed for his shoulder. You taught me well." Waya shook his head in wonder. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known." "Not brave," Kate said, reaching for his hand. "Just certain. Certain about us." They rode south that day and west the next, and continued westward for weeks after that. The journey was long and often difficult, but they faced each challenge together, crossing rivers, navigating mountain passes, avoiding towns where a white woman and an Apache man traveling together might attract dangerous attention. They encountered kindness, too, from a Mexican family who shared their modest meal, from a Chinese railroad worker who guided them through a treacherous mountain pass, from an elderly Navajo woman who treated Waya's leg when the old wound became inflamed. When they finally reached California, they found a small coastal town where the population was a mix of cultures: Mexican, Chinese, European, native. There, with Kate's inheritance, they purchased a modest farm overlooking the Pacific Ocean. There, they built a new home, a new life. And there, on a cliff above the endless sea, they made their vows to each other beneath an open sky. No preacher, no witnesses except the circling gulls and the eternal waves. Waya placed a ring of woven grass on Kate's finger, beside her mother's gold band. Kate tied a strand of her golden hair around Waya's wrist. They spoke promises neither of them would ever break. In time, the farm prospered. They planted fruit trees and vegetables. They raised horses, Waya's skilled handling attracting buyers from miles around. Kate started a small school for the children of migrant workers, teaching reading and writing in the evenings after the fieldwork was done. In time, children came, 2 daughters and a son, all with their father's dark eyes and their mother's determined spirit. The girls, Sarah and Elena, inherited Kate's golden hair and Waya's quiet strength. Their son, Thomas, named for the man who had brought them together, had his father's straight black hair and his mother's quick smile. In time, the neighbors ceased to stare at the unusual family and came to respect the quiet Apache man who could predict weather better than any almanac, and the strong-willed woman who could outshoot most men in the county. They faced prejudice still. There were shopkeepers who refused to serve them, parents who wouldn't let their children play with the half-breed Smith children. But for every closed door, there seemed to be an open one. For every whispered slur, there was a hand extended in friendship. News from Arizona reached them occasionally. Clayton Williams had eventually sold the ranch and moved east, his wound having never properly healed. Reginald Hargrove had searched for his daughter for years, finally dying a bitter old man with no heir to his fortune. The railroad had transformed Copper Creek into a bustling town, the old ways giving way to the new. Sometimes, on clear nights, Kate and Waya would sit on their porch overlooking the ocean, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that had watched over them in Arizona during those 5 years when Waya slept outside her cabin, waiting for the storm that would finally bring him to her door. "Do you ever regret it?" Kate asked once, many years later, her golden hair now streaked with silver. "Everything we left behind?" Waya, his own hair showing threads of grey at the temples, smiled that rare, beautiful smile that still made her heart flutter after all their years together. "How can I regret the path that led me here?" he said simply. "With you, I found my home." Kate leaned her head against his shoulder, their fingers intertwined as they had been on that fateful morning when they faced down Clayton Williams and chose their future together. "With you," she echoed softly. "I found mine too." And as the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in colors that rivaled the Arizona desert they had once called home, Kate and Waya held fast to each other, two spirits who had defied a world determined to keep them apart, who had found in each other the courage to forge their own destiny, who had created, against all odds, a love strong enough to weather any storm. The end. Dear listener, as the embers of our story fade into the quiet night, I find myself wondering about you. Yes, you sitting there, perhaps with a cup of tea cooling beside you, or wrapped in a favorite blanket worn soft with years of comfort. How many storms have you weathered? How many sunrises have you witnessed when you thought the night would never end? The calendar pages have turned, seasons have changed, and here you are, still standing, still breathing, still capable of being moved by a love story set in a time long past. That's rather remarkable, isn't it? Kate and Waya's journey across the desert might seem distant from your world of smartphones and medical appointments, grandchildren's graduations and quiet Sunday mornings. But I suspect there's a reason their story found its way to you tonight. Perhaps it's because you too have known what it means to sleep outside someone's cabin, metaphorically speaking, to wait patiently for what matters most, to hold space for possibility when others saw only impossibility. The world tells us that passion belongs to the young, that adventure has an expiration date, that dreams should be practical once we've reached a certain age. What magnificent nonsense! The most revolutionary act is to refuse the shrinking of your spirit as your body changes. Tonight, as you rest your head on your pillow, I invite you to reject the notion that your most vibrant chapters are behind you. The Arizona desert blooms most spectacularly after enduring the harshest conditions. Why would you be any different? May your sleep be deep and your awakening gentle. May tomorrow bring an unexpected moment of beauty that catches in your throat. A cardinal at the feeder, perhaps, or sunlight painting your wall gold through the curtains. May you notice it, claim it, and recognize it as yours to treasure. And should old sorrows visit in the night, remember that you are protected by the accumulated wisdom of your years, by the love you've given and received, and by the simple miracle that of all the possible humans who could have existed across time, you were chosen to be here now. That's not coincidence, that's magnificence. Until our trails cross again. The Wild West Whispers team, thank you for staying with us until the very end. We hope this story touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours in telling it. Please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. Your support means everything to us. It truly motivates our team to continue crafting stories full of love, redemption, resilience, and unforgettable turns of fate. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. And before you go, at the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by another emotional journey waiting to be heard. Wild West Whispers team.